Welcome to a very special episode and series for the Innovation Show here in Harvard Business School in HBS Publishing in Klarman Hall in Boston. We're going to start with something a little bit different. The question to you is, do you ever prepare properly for the future? Even though you know it's coming for you. And this is not death. This is something entirely different that will happen to us all, but very few of us actually engage with that. And we're here with a very special guest from the Innovation Show. She's been on the show before. It's great to have her on the show again, in person this time for the first time ever. Teresa Amabile, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aidan. I'm so happy to be talking with you again.
It's great to be with you. I didn't tell you this the last day because I had this on my table here in front of me, and I have a little practice on the Innovation Show of wearing a pin that reflects in some way what that episode is about. So I brought this especially. This is Venus, and for me, it represents renewal or renaissance, which is rebirth. And actually, I think of your work as work in rebirth and renewal. So that's a little gift for you that you can take with you into the future as well.
Oh, my
goodness. And then I couldn't do that. I couldn't be an Irishman without giving you something else as well. So that's another little gift. And while I'm here,
oh my gosh,
I'm going to interrupt the flow, but we'll just leave it flowing. I want to thank the crew here that have been setting up for a day and a half here, and I'm going to fill them full of Irish liqueur here with Bailey. So Dave, Ellie, and Simona, I want to give you guys these as well. I'm probably going to drop them and smash them, but I'll give them to you off camera here. There you go, Dave. There's Dave.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Oh, how
Ellie.
Great.
You
can
Thank
set
you.
mine aside and make sure I don't leave
Happy
without
Christmas.
it, Dave.
Thank you for all your efforts. So that's a quick intro. I want to also say thank you to our sponsor, Kyndryl, for running and reimagining the technology that drives the world's infrastructures now with an AI layer. Also check out the Kyndryl Institute, where you'll find a plethora of amazing content. But let's get back to the show and to the word. It's not that, it's something totally different. So I'll let you tee this one up because you've asked this to audiences before. You've given them the word and seen what came back. So over to you, Teresa.
Yes, I like to, at the beginning of a talk on this particular research, ask people to hear me say a word and then remember the first thing that pops into their head when they hear the word. The word is retirement. So I've paused for a second.
Think about that.
Yeah, so that your podcast audience can think about the word. We gave that little game to all of the 120 people we interviewed for this research. And the results were really pretty surprising to me. We created a word cloud from the responses to that word for all of the older professionals who we interviewed. We had people in other age groups, life stage groups, but the older professionals age 55 plus who were still working. The word cloud showed as the most prominent responses: scary, never, far away, unknown. One person even said facing retirement is like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into a void. I was really surprised and kind of disturbed by this level of fear and negativity about retiring among people who were likely going to be retiring in the next 10 to 15 years. So that really struck me, and our aim with the research, our aim with the book, is to help people get some insight into the process of retiring and show them some ways it can be navigated and relieve that fear.
And it's much like your work on the progress principle as well. For those who haven't heard that, I'll link to that in the show notes. Brilliant work that Teresa has done. But for me, this was a natural, excuse the pun, progression where, again, if you're not preparing for progress, the progress won't just magically appear. It reminded me of my own career as a professional rugby player, because in professional sports, you have to retire early because your body gives up before your brain does. So you have to prepare for that. And I was very lucky myself in that I was injured at the end of my career. That wasn't pleasant to go through, but it gave me the gift of preparation. And one of the things you talk about is it takes work to actually retire.
That's right. You know, that was one of the surprises that came out of the research, is that Many people think of retiring as what happens on your last day on the job, at the end of your career. But it's so much more than that. It is not a one-day event. It's something that can take usually at least a year and sometimes several years to complete as a process from the very beginning, the first task, the first of the 4 tasks that we discovered, which is making the decision about when and how to retire. And that task can start years before the actual retirement date. For some people, other people, it happens in the immediate future before that, all the way through the last task, which is consolidating a more or less stable retirement life for yourself. And there are tasks in between that need to happen. Everyone who retires, at least in the U.S., has to confront these 4 tasks. The first one, deciding when to retire, is not so much of a decision in some industrialized countries where there may be mandatory retirement ages. But certainly in the U.S., where it's illegal to have a mandatory retirement in most professions, that's a big task, making that decision about when and how to retire. The second task is detaching yourself from your work, which for many of us can be very tricky. The third task is exploring and experimenting to try to build a provisional retirement life for yourself. And that final task is to work with those provisional elements, decide which of them works, and consolidate a more or less stable rhythm and routine for your retirement life.
What I found remarkable about it is, and why I thought it was so relevant, regardless if you're retiring or not, it's really a framework for any renewal. So in organizational renewal, you have to go through the same things. You can't over-identify with the identity or the products that you have served your customers with in the past. Now you have to actually embrace something new. So you can't cling to that past. And I saw it as almost an S curve, and you've got to the top of the curve, but you have to prepare for the next one. So few of us do, and we do that in all aspects of life. We don't prepare for empty nesting, or we don't prepare for retirement from a financial perspective, if even. And I thought that was just an important point to call out, but also something you said about the fear and standing at the void, all these kind of reactions people had. Those people that Teresa and our team had studied, and this is a team of emeritus professors, heavy hitters, and all the people you interviewed didn't have financial problems. And I think that's important to call out, because that would be something that a lot of people would face, but these didn't. And regardless of that, they still had that fear.
That's right. And that's one reason it was so surprising. I want to return for just a second to what you were saying before about the work that's involved in retiring. The work can be very enjoyable. Many people think of drudgery when they think of work. It can be enjoyable, and it is for many people. But it's work in the sense that it takes time and effort and attention to prepare for and actually have a smooth transition into a satisfying retirement life. And that is true for many life transitions. And you brought up a few. That makes me want to take my little gift from you, Venus, and say, yes, all of those transitions do involve a kind of renewal, a kind of rebirth. Whether it's making an organizational change that will lead to a more innovative future, or making a change in personal life, the decision to get married, for example, the decision to start a family. Those transitions, organizationally, personally, do require preparation. They require decision-making, and they require adjustments along the way. Adjusting the identity that you hold or the identity that the organization holds, maybe morphing that over time. And they certainly involve a lot of work in detaching from the old, reattaching to the new and discovering along the way what that new is. Even if you have planned a path, there are always going to be adjustments necessary along the way before you can settle into something, the next state that's more or less stable.
I met our mutual friend who has great time for you, Michael Tushman, for breakfast today. And we were talking about that moment where if you're working with a senior leadership team, there's a moment of almost melancholy or sadness when there's a realization it's not going to be the same going forward. And you mentioned Venus and rebirth, but that also means a death of the old in a way. And I just wanted to double click on that one, because if you look at all aspects of life, that's often the most difficult piece. Is maybe you've over-identified with your career, the persona that you'd created, and now that person has to be kind of set free in a way, and you have to do it.
That's right. That's right. The work is internal in this case when you're talking about the retiring transition. And that there are echoes of that certainly in organizational transformation as well. There is a letting go that's necessary. And I think that's in part where the fear comes from. Many of us don't or can't envision a future where we are a different person in many respects, doing different things with our time. Just as organizationally, transformation can mean a lot of struggles for individuals inside the organization in imagining themselves as individuals, as teams, as departments and divisions, behaving in a new way and doing new things. So I do think that that's where a lot of the fear over retiring comes from. And it's so important to point out again what you mentioned before. We only interviewed people who, on a screening questionnaire, and we had all the volunteers fill out a screening questionnaire, we only chose people who rated themselves as at least reasonably financially secure, if not more financially secure, and reasonably physically healthy. We know from a lot of prior research that health and wealth are two enormously important factors in retirement decisions and retirement experiences. We wanted to set those aside as much as possible as major factors. Of course, they did enter in to many of the conversations we had. They were concerns of many of the people we interviewed, but they weren't the overwhelming, overriding concerns that people who are not financially secure have, or people who are in poor health experience.
That thing about not preparing, I was thinking about that. So I often think about this even physically, is that you're constantly atrophying, especially when you get over a certain age. You're losing collagen, all these vital parts of keeping you stuck together start to fade. But you have to prepare doing the work before you need it. So that whole thing, the Chinese proverb, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, that's what hits people. And I know we've kind of alluded to there's a lot of responsibility on the person retiring, but equally you say the organization has to step up, and the organizations often don't. I mentioned sport. This is usually what the pattern you see in sport is. Maybe there's a player, they're getting a bit old now, they're a little bit slower, their mind's getting faster, but their body gets slower. And often a lot of clubs will frustrate that player out, so they leave. And so they're no longer on the books, or they might go to a lesser club, etc. And I had that myself, being injured, and it's so demoralizing because, and this is where I think the segue is nice to the progress principle, is you're no longer making progress, and no, you don't feel like you're making any kind of contribution. And worse than that, you feel like in a way you're some type of nuisance or weight on the organization. And you see that in organizations as well. And it's a terrible way to send somebody off who's given so much to an organization.
We worked with multiple organizations that allowed us kindly to come in and recruit their professionals, their currently working professionals, and their retired professionals for the study. We found that some of those organizations did not adequately support their older employees, nor did they adequately draw the value from them that they could have. At least one organization in our study was able to do that, And specifically what I'm talking about is giving people, even in the final months and years of their career, assignments that call for creativity. This was one of the most impressive findings, I think, from our research. And this was actually a quantitative finding. Most of our findings are qualitative based on what people said in the interviews, but we did use some small surveys along the way with the people that we studied. And we found that to the extent that people had assignments calling for creativity toward the end of their career and were able to feel that they actually were being creative in their work, contributing to the organization in that way, to the extent that they had that, they were more likely to be satisfied in their retirement lives. So what happened in those final months and years of the career impacts people's level of satisfaction in their retirement life, which was enormously surprising to us. What happened at work mattered more than what they were doing outside of work before they retired in terms of predicting their satisfaction with their lives after retiring. And I think it's a twofold impact. We saw from this quantitative result that there's certainly an impact on the individuals themselves. I think it's because they feel, and this came out in the interviews a bit, they feel like they are wrapping up a really satisfying chapter in their lives, kind of like they can put a bow on their career and put it on the shelf as something great that they did in their lives. And I think that that makes them feel better about moving on to the next chapter of their lives. But the organization benefits. The organization benefits by drawing on the wisdom, the experience, the expertise of these people who have often been in the organization for decades and who still have great creative capacity, rather than giving them make-work assignments or something that is so distasteful that I think the organization is hoping they will leave. They will just retire. This is the way to get them to retire. Give them something horrible and boring. And you experience that as a rugby player, I think. You're sort of put out to pasture, although you were still drawing a paycheck.
It's demoralizing. And you see it with people where, as you said, they have so much institutional knowledge, maybe from the way the organization used to be. But if that can be implanted to somebody new, I often think about, I grew up in a lovely park land. And I remember as a kid, my dad was responsible for the architecture of the park, the landscape architecture. And he replanted the whole driveway. And he remembered him telling me this, and he used to bore me, telling me stuff about that I pretended I was interested in, but this stuck with me. So that he had these big mature trees, but he planted really small trees in between the big mature trees. And he said those trees actually serve to protect the other one while it's growing. So it has this shelter. And I often think of it as that kind of handing over of the institutional knowledge. But if the older tree is like going, thanks for your service, and is chopped down, that's how it feels. And I can see the psychological effect of, after all I gave those guys, because so many of us spend countless hours. We pull in the assignment over the weekend. We sacrifice our kids' nativity play, whatever it is, to do the work. And then all of a sudden the organization goes, thanks for that. See you later. Now, I know the organization doesn't owe you anything, but it surely should give you more than the gold watch and a tap on the back. If there is a gold watch. And one of the things you point to is the importance of rituals to help people going forward.
Absolutely. Most organizations do mark a retirement in some way. We found that that can be surprisingly important to people as they're ending their careers. One organization had a practice of, it was a smaller organization, a relatively entrepreneurial young one. They had a practice of, when someone was retiring, having the whole office come together for a little celebration. And we found that one of the very senior level people who was retiring from the organization, as I said, it was relatively young. His career there had been 20 years, I think. He didn't feel great about his value to the organization in his final few years there. He just wasn't sure that he was contributing what the organization really valued most. But what was said to him in the tributes that people paid during that final party, that ritual, meant the world to him. I interviewed him, I think, 10 times, and he mentioned that final ritual and how much it meant in at least 5 of the interviews I did with him after he retired. So that left him with a great feeling about the organization. And I'll tell you something, he was a terrific ambassador for that organization after he retired.
Yeah, and how much would you pay for that? I mean, that's the thing.
Exactly. He was able to help the organization recruit great young people. And I want to say something else about young people. We did have a cohort of millennials that we interviewed as part of the study. We don't spend a lot of time talking about our interviews with them in the book, but one thing we found in looking for intergenerational conflict, which is talked about a lot in the media, we didn't find that in these millennials, nor did we find it in most of the older people that we interviewed. In fact, what we found was that some of these millennials talked about how important it was for them to have people who were near the end of their careers as mentors, as teammates, people who had that institutional knowledge, who could introduce them to customers and talk to them about, you know, what goes on behind the scenes in the organization and how to work with this particular customer or how to work with this particular supplier or distributor. That kind of tacit knowledge is invaluable. And we found that many of the younger employees appreciated it. So it's not just nice to treat those large, mature trees well. It really is helpful to those smaller, growing trees.
It's funny that I was thinking about how you can make somebody feel devalued at the end, but equally you can do that at the start where you have maybe a new hire and the new hire comes to work and their computer's not ready. It won't be ready for a month. They're left kind of floating, checking emails, checking their social media, and they feel devalued, or they feel actually, well, what's the point of me being here? And that can be the first opening moment joining an organization, but equally it's the flip side. And it also made me think about how, again, in sport, but also as you've shown in the research, when you're in the bubble doing the work, it's very hard to prepare for that future, develop skills. And you call out some really important skills that are needed. Say at the end of a career in rugby, they try and give you financial training. They try and give you to understand what skills are transferable into the real world for you. But so few players will stop and go, I really need to focus on this. And this is where I say being injured was helpful. But you say equally the organization needs to offer those services to you. So financial planning, psychological planning, relational planning.
Exactly. Most organizations of medium size or large size do offer regular financial planning seminars for people of any age and stage in the organization. They're mostly attended by the older employees. But we didn't find any organization offering a program on the things that our research discovered people really need help with. And that is the psychological challenges of retiring, including the identity issues that we've alluded to, and the relational challenges, managing their current relationships at work and outside of work, as well as developing new relationships in retiring, and the life restructuring challenges, which are huge. Think about it. You've had something that structured your life, gave it a rhythm and routine for decades in many cases. And that was most of your waking life for decades of your life. And now it's going to be gone. Those 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week that you were spending in that profession are now going to be yours to do with what you want. And there are people who confront that on the first day of retirement rather than thinking about it at all beforehand. So organizations could do people a tremendous service by offering seminars on the kinds of things that we studied in our research.
One of them was structural, and I thought that was worth calling out. What did that refer to in the research?
So life structure is a term that we use to refer to essentially everything in your life. And we asked people in our study to imagine their lives in terms of a map, a diagram. And we had 14 of those 120 people, 120 professionals. 14 of them were getting ready to retire when we started our study with their cohort in their organization. So we asked them, will you let us follow you as you retire, as you go through that transition and into your first few years of retirement? So 14 people said, yes, I will let you interview me multiple times. The rest we interviewed once, but these 14 people we came to know very, very well. We call them our stars because we feature them prominently in the book. We tell their stories in some detail. And we found that for those 14 people, it was crucial for them to be able to tackle all 4 of those tasks that I mentioned. But they were on their own. They were on their own. Their organization didn't offer them preparation or planning. They did draw maps of their life structure for us, their life structure pre-retirement. And of course, work or career was there in every life map before retirement. And for some of the 14, it was huge. It was by far the biggest circle or box that they drew in their pre-retirement life map. For others, it was a little bit more modest size, but it was there. And after retirement, of course, that box or bubble or circle, whatever, is gone, right? But the other contexts of the life are so important to consider in relation to that work life. Your relationships, your home, where do you live geographically? Where do you spend your time? What other groups and organizations do you belong to, both before and after retirement? So your relationships, your activities, how you spend your time, where you spend your time, all of those things are important parts of the life structure. And life structure does need to change after retirement. For some people, they simply grow the other bubbles or circles that they had in their life beforehand. But for many people, they introduce new activities, new places to be into their life map, into their life structure. And it really stands people in good stead if they spend some time thinking about that beforehand. You don't have to feel like you've got everything planned out in how you're going to restructure your life, but giving it some thought and having some ideas, maybe even doing some of that exploration and experimentation beforehand can be a really good idea.
I love there's a Spartan warrior mantra, the more you sweat in times of peace, the less you bleed in war. Not saying that you're in war when you retire.
I'm hearing those sports metaphors coming out again.
Sorry, you can take the guy out of the locker room. There's a couple of things I'd just love to lean into. One of them was, so the importance of the organization. You shared some examples of organizations that really benefited from it, but also those organizations didn't just train the people, but they kept in touch afterwards. There was like alumni and there was like newsletters and get-togethers where the person, it was almost like training wheels, helping them go an off-ramp from the organization.
Yes, absolutely. Let me say a few ways that we saw organizations manage this really well, both in those final months of the career and then in the first months and years of retirement. And again, it's to the benefit of the individual retiring, but it's also to the organization's benefit to do this. So one organization from which we drew participants in the study had an interesting transition to retirement program whereby professionals in certain jobs could sign a contract to retire in 18 months. And for those 18 months, work 3 days a week, get paid for 4 days a week, and enjoy all their full benefits. As you might imagine, this was enormously attractive to employees in the organization. And we interviewed people who had taken advantage of it. while they were in their final months of their career. And they did feel that they were really benefiting from this program and kind of easing into retirement in that way, having more time in their week to explore and experiment, but still having part of them in that work identity and still feeling like they were contributing there. But the organization benefited because it had much greater clarity, allowing it to plan staffing and succession, because they knew these people are going to be retiring in 18 months. And they could decide what to do with those positions, who to bring in. Did they want to have some overlap between the retiring person and the person who was going to be taking over their position? How did they want to do the knowledge transfer during that time? And that's another really important piece that many organizations fall down on, and that is having a good knowledge transfer mechanism. Of course, it benefits the organization. It benefits the colleagues that the retiring person has been working with, benefits that team by transferring the explicit knowledge as well as the tacit knowledge. But it helps the organization, certainly. It helps that person to know that they are valued right up until their last day. What they know, what they've learned matters.
So let's give people some practical actions. So there's the 4 A's. So there's alignment, awareness, adaptability, and agency. The 4 A's, that actually is a framework for our audience if you're facing retirement. And don't leave it, start now. If you're 10 years from retirement, start now. That's one of the big messages I get. But this framework, I'd love you to share this, and then maybe we'll land the ship on purpose being the final element.
That sounds great, Aidan. Can I say something else about what organizations can do?
Please.
After a person retires, a savvy organization, we found one in our study, will keep in touch with those retirees afterwards. We saw a newsletter for retirees, a social media group. A couple of the organizations had a social media group that they made available to people who were retired. Occasional parties sponsored by the company for people who have retired. Some part-time contract work opportunities can be extremely attractive in helping people to make that transition, especially your more valued employees making that transition. And, we found even just calling retirees alumni replaces a negative stereotype with a positive one. And organizations that do this right, that treat their alumni well after they've retired, have created great ambassadors for the organization out there in the community, whether it's with recruiting new employees or engendering goodwill toward the organization within the community. So that's really important for organizations to keep in mind.
That's the A of alumni. Let's share with our audience the 4 A's where people can prepare, both as the organization, but mainly for you if you're the protagonist.
Yes, we found that for individuals, the first A that's important is trying to create an alignment, a good alignment between yourself, that is everything about you, your identity, your various identities, your needs, your values, what's really important to you, what matters to you, your health. So aligning that self as you are now, not as you were at midlife, but as you are now, aligning that self with your life structure. And that is all the context of your life, everything in your life. And if someone is approaching retirement in a fruitful way in the final years of their career, they're going to be making this assessment. How well does my current life structure with career as a big circle, how well does that match the self that I am now? And ideally, at some point, the person will recognize, okay, having work, having career in my life doesn't match the self that I am right now for whatever reason. So it's time to make the change in life structure by removing that. And that is enabled by the next 2 A's, that kind of realignment of self and life structure is enabled first by awareness. That's the second A. You need to develop a keen awareness of who you are and what's important to you and what your needs are right now, what your values are right now. And a clear-eyed awareness of what your life structure really is. What are the dynamics going on in your life? How are they impacting you? And you at some point will make a move on your life enabled by the third A, which is agency. And that's being able to proactively change something about your life structure or maybe about yourself to bring them into better alignment. The big change we've been talking about in the life structure is removing work, removing career, and realigning that life structure in a way that better matches who you are, the self that you are right now. That doesn't mean having no work at all. You might decide to do some part-time contract work for your employer. You might decide to find a different job that's based on an avocation you've had, as we saw some people do in our study. But that realignment is enabled by having a sense of agency. Okay, I'm going to make a proactive move here. But you have to remember, not only do you impact your life structure, but your life structure impacts you. There are things going on in your relationship, your family, your community that you have no control over. And that's why you need the fourth A, which is adaptability. You have to be able to adapt to things that happen in your life over which you cannot exert control. So that's where you have to make adjustments in yourself, in your attitude, and in your approach, and maybe adjust other things in your life structure to accommodate the big change. The change could be positive, right? Birth of a grandchild is a positive event for many older adults. It could also mean something that's really tragic, like the death of a longtime spouse. Adaptability is crucial, and you can learn and practice these skills, these 4A skills. And in our book, we talk about ways that people can do that.
Purpose is a huge one that comes out there time and time again. You said about awareness of yourself, your values, all this kind of stuff. We talk about organizations not usually being explicit about that. So maybe the senior leadership team are clear on purpose of an organization, mission statement, etc. But as you go down the lifts of the elevator in the organization, people are less and less clear. But equally, we are. So we very rarely start our career and go, okay, here's what I'm about. Here's what drives me. This is the kind of careers that will satisfy that for me. We do that at the start. We don't do it at the start, I should say, and we don't do it at the end. And I think that's a nice top and tail to see that this is not a linear line of life going from left to right. It's actually a cycle. And if you treat it like a cycle, you'll actually go, well, that just repeats itself in a different context later. The context, me not being working for an organization. So purpose is really what should drive you at the end. And I've seen some people retire and wither terribly once they retire because it's like they don't have a purpose anymore. Their kids have grown up, the kids aren't at home, maybe they're living abroad, and now their purpose was derived from work and that's gone for them.
Yeah, maybe their purpose was derived from work. Maybe it was derived from family. Maybe it was derived from both. And those have changed drastically, right? What we found in our research was that people do need a sense of purpose. They need to feel that they matter to the world in whatever that means to them. It doesn't have to be purpose with a big P. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to be doing something that changes my society, changes my community. For some people, that is the kind of purpose that they need to find in that next chapter of life after career. It can happen through working with nonprofits. It can happen with starting a nonprofit, for heaven's sake. It can happen in a number of ways. But there are also many people who find purpose in a small p kind of way, and that is finding satisfaction in their day-by-day activities, feeling that they're contributing, that they matter in that way by perhaps serving as a volunteer in their community, by spending more time with their grandchildren, if they're able to do that. For some people, they find purpose in traveling, whether it's just traveling within their own country and getting to know people in a deeper way, or traveling the world. So purpose doesn't mean just one thing. It is important for people to find, but you can find it by doing that exploration and experimentation that is so necessary in where you spend your time and what you spend your time doing. As you approach retirement and after retirement, you will find things that will be satisfying to you, that will give you that sense of purpose, but you have to exercise agency in finding it.
You're not a victim of that. That's one of the things I really realized reading the book as well, is you have agency. You can't just be there like a turkey waiting for Christmas, essentially. I wondered what your final message was. What out of everything you found was most touching, and maybe that you can talk to our audience and say, here's my message to you. If there's one thing you do, this is the one that really stood out for me.
If I could give the audience one piece of advice, it would be to do spend time thinking about retiring, no matter what your age and stage of life. And if you are retired, do spend some time thinking about whether your life structure currently is meeting your needs. Don't be afraid to start experimenting with something even now that might be the right path for you in retirement. But don't get trapped into feeling that you have to have it all figured out, because that is impossible.
Beautiful. And I want to just thank again Dave, Simona and Ellie for taking the time here at Christmas time over in Boston. Thanks to our sponsor Kindle as well. And most of all, thanks to the author of The Progress Principle and this brilliant new book, Retiring, Teresa Amabile. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aidan. I've really enjoyed it.